Mary Eleanor Hibbert steadfastly amassed the most representative and comprehensive collection of Cape silver, covering the top silversmiths and examples of their work. This allows us the privilege of seeing what I would call the Cape style across the pieces in this collection. The shapes of teapots and coffee pots, while not unique to Cape silver, have a finesse that is easily noted, such as the coffee pots, the first one being by Johannes Casparus Lotter, and the second one by Daniel Henrik Smit. The same feel can be noted in the hot milk jugs by Willem Godfried Lotter and Gerhardus Lotter, and if you have a look at them, you will notice the sort of pot-bellied look on the hot milk jugs and the almost cup-shaped look on the coffee pots. A lot of it was probably due to the way that it was made. One has to imagine that back in the time from the 1780s to the 1830s, to make silver, the silversmith would take in rix dollars, VOC coins, sovereigns, any kind of silver coinage. And they would melt that down into an ingot, which would then be hammered out, and then it would be raised up into that cup shape. So that cup shape, it was an easier thing to do, and which is why we tend to find that in the colonies. Cape silver sugar bowls are also of a very distinctive shape and size. And while they are found in all colonial silver, especially American colonial silver, our bowls have a symmetry that once you have seen, you will recognize and appreciate for their generosity of size and depth. Interestingly, the two that we have here, the first on the left, on your left, is by Daniel Henrik Smit, and the second is by the maker we refer to as HNS. And we refer to him as HNS, and I say we, Stefan Weltz, of course, coined the term in his book, as the stamp itself doesn't look like a recognized stamp, and so when you look at it, you see the initials HNS, and it's quite an interesting stamp. There's been a lot of speculation that HNS could be related to Smit due to the similarities between their work, and this collection allows us to look at two of the sugar baskets, and you can see exactly what I mean in terms of how close they are in terms of their look. Collections such as this enable one to compare the styles of manufacture, the metal thickness used, and the decoration and size of the patterns of their cast silver borders and feet. The patterns that would be used would have been carved out in things like cuttlefish, and then the silver would have been poured in between the two cuttlefish parts, and that would actually give you the basic shape that they would then use as a flower or as a foot that they would then apply to the pieces that they would be doing. Personally, I believe that these two baskets, in other words, Daniel Henrik Smit and HNS, are probably one and the same. And as we digitally document more of their respective work, this theory can be explored. As a restorer of silver, I know how quickly tools, especially maker's marks, can wear. And when one looks closely at these two marks, there's definitely a case to be made. The ability to digitally photograph something means that we can actually digitally measure it once we've taken that photo. So the step forward would be to compare the two marks and to see if they are the same stamp, one which is obviously newer and one which is worn, or if they are a separate stamp, which meant that maybe the one got old and was replaced. And so the rubbed one, which we think is HNS, would obviously be the first one, and the Daniel Henrik Smit one would be later. Currently, my read on it is when I look at the styling, it actually works the other way around. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done here, but it's a nice thing to actually have the ability to do. And this collection allows us to step in that direction. From my brief research on Mary Eleanor Hibbert herself, she must have begun collecting in the late 1990s. And the first documented piece I could trace that she bought was this exceptional covered cup. It was by Johann Henrik Voss, marked with his maker's mark, struck 4 times in each corner of the base, and this followed the European and English conventions in hallmarking. Cape silver was of the same standard as sterling silver in Europe, which is 925, and I remember talking to Stefan many years ago. He ran spectrographic tests on a lot of the Cape silver pieces that he had access to, and most of those came in literally with a very close variance to 925. And obviously that can be seen, the coinage of the day that they were using was of the same standard, so it was a very logical thing to take your payment in coinage. The silversmith would then melt it down, manufacture the piece, and whatever offcuts were left over would form part of his fee that he would be entitled to keep back. With no central government-regulated assay and hallmarking control, the silversmiths used their own initials to mark the work as their own. And by doing so, they stated that they had produced a piece that was of acceptable sterling standard and belonged to them. And in a very close-knit community such as Cape Town, which had a very strong religious background, your word, especially as a silversmith, was probably the most important thing you had. So unlike other areas of silver, especially English silver, you don't find things like duty dodging and things that are soldered onto the bottom of pieces to make them heavier and to push up the value. What we see in Cape silver is essentially a very pure form of artistic expression done in a very honest way. And I think that's probably what attracted Mary Eleanor Hibbert to collecting of it, because a lot of the pieces that you look at through here are things that would have been used in homes, they would have entertained, they would have been something that when the ship arrived in Cape Town, a major happening, new people arrived from England, you would have been able to take them into your home. They would have firstly been impressed with the view that we see every day, but then they would sit down and they would drink from an English tea service, but it was made here. And they wouldn't know that. They would just know that the sophistication, quality of what they were receiving here as guests was the same as you would expect in any European country. What's interesting on this particular cup and cover is that the engraving on it is probably the best example that I have ever seen on a piece of Cape silver. And David Murray and myself were discussing earlier that this piece might have well been made here, but the engraving might have actually been done in Europe, probably England. And you know, we have to realize that ships did go backwards and forwards, and it certainly wouldn't be without possibility that a piece could be made here, could be taken to England and engraved there. And that's what we see today, because the engraving is incredibly sophisticated. And if you compare that engraving to, say, the engraving on snuff boxes, you'll be able to see what I mean. And that's the joy of this collection. You can actually have a look at these and actually see the differences in it. It obviously helps, you know, sort of having an idea of where to look. And that was the joy for me, was getting in here earlier today and looking through to see if I missed anything or if I was right. Now, no Cape silver collection would be complete without a cowrie shell snuff box. And one can imagine as Daniel Hockley, a London-trained silversmith of great repute, who arrived in 1820 as an 1820 settler in Algoa Bay, the joy that he must have had in discovering these beautiful shells lying freely on the beach. With a simple process of sanding the shell down and then applying the silver lid, which would be simply pick engraved, he created one of these beautiful snuff boxes. And snuff would have been a very important social context item back in the time from about 1790 to about 1820. The taking of snuff was very socially accepted. The sharing of it was also accepted. So of course, if you went to England, for example, and you took your Cape Cowrie snuff box with you, people in England would look at the box with its colors of the shell, and it was something that was exotic, that came from far off climes, that would have impressed them. Finally, I must touch again on the Cape Silver Sugar Basket, again by H&S, that originated from the Duplessis family collection sold by Strauss & Co. back in 2011. It actually made a record price for a sugar bowl. Featured on a South African stamp released in 1985, and in my mind is the highlight in this collection. As these pieces are dispersed, I am privileged to have been able to see and handle them, as this unique opportunity comes along but once in a lifetime. To prospective bidders, good luck. And here it is safe to say that you are bidding on the very best available, and certainly of museum quality. And let me add, you might have competition. Thank you very much.